Hey gang, and welcome back to another video in my Bad Boys of BADAB series. Games Workshop were kind enough to send me the new battle box for the Red Corsairs. So far, I've painted the Red Corsairs Raiders up in different schemes from all of the traitors from BADAB. So if you haven't seen that video already, please go and watch it. I paint all 10 Marines up in one squad in 5 different types of schemes based on different chapters that were or maybe present in the BADAB War. In this video, I'm going to move on to the next squad, which is a squad of 5 Terminators. Now, just quickly, the sort of headcanon that I have around this army project is that I'm going to do an entire army of Chaos Marines or Traitor Marines that are all representing different chapters that were present around the time of the BADAB War. Pretty much treat it as if Lufthuron actually won the BADAB War and all of these chapters have slaves or thralls to Lufthuron, and he is leading a giant ragtag horde of pirates, and each of these guys has their own heraldry and chapter colors still as an insult to the Imperium. In the previous video, we did Executioners, Lamenters, and several others. In this video, though, I decided to choose 5 of the more elite or prominent chapters in the BADAB War and make them into 5 of the Chaos Terminators here. I chose the Salamanders, which were the only first founding legion or chapter, should I say, at the BADAB War, as well as the Minotaurs, who crushed the Lamenters towards the end of it, the Carcharadons Astra, which is definitely a fan favorite out there, the Exorcists chapter, which are just flipping awesome, and lastly, I decided to take it way back to Rogue Trader and do a Tiger Claw as the sergeant of this squad. Now, the Tiger Claws were before the Astral Claws, and the Astral Claws were before the Red Corsairs. You get where I'm going with this? We're going all the way back to Rogue Trader with this one, and I'm going to attempt to do something that I've never attempted before: Tiger Stripes. Once again, this video is part of my less is more philosophy on miniature painting. Fewer paints, fewer techniques, but still achieving dramatic, contrasting results that look great on your table. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. So with this army, obviously everybody having different chapter colors on, it is going to look like a multicolored rainbow of vomit, but we're going to tie things together with bases, and just the overall vibe of every miniature is going to have some sort of consistency throughout. I want this entire army to be very grimdark, so we're going to go with Chaos Black as the natural primer for everything and work our way up. But let's kick things off with the Carcharadons Astra, also known as the Space Sharks. I started with a black undercoat and then I went in with Administratum Grey, sponged all over this miniature from above in a very liberal fashion. With the Tiger Claw, I took the Rogue Trader artwork as inspiration here, except I wanted it slightly more black and less emphasis on the tiger stripes. So I'm going to go in here and highlight all of the parts of the armor that are going to be black with some Corvus black, which is just a slightly lighter black, more of a dark turquoise, again sponged on all over in a fairly liberal fashion. Of course, the guy with the heavy flamer had to be the Salamander, and we're going to go with Blighted Green, which is quite a cold green really as a sort of base for this one. Again, sponged all over the miniature from above, making sure to leave those recesses or deepest recesses pitch black. For the Minotaur, we want things bronze, so naturally Balthazar Gold is the best place to start with this. Instead of using a sponge in this case, I'm actually going to use a very big brush, and we're going to sort of over brush the bronze onto the miniature, giving it slightly less difference in contrast than the other miniatures that we did with a sponge. I find the brush gives me a better smoothness and slightly more control when doing metallics generally, especially as I've already painted up about 3,000 points of Minotaurs that I actually never used in 40k ever. During COVID, Minotaurs were my sort of COVID project, and I ended up amassing a massive force of Primaris Marines that I did in this exact scheme here for Minotaurs, and I must say I did love them. However, they did go to a better home in the end. Lastly, for our Exorcist, we are going with a bright bloody red sort of metallic armor here, so I decided to start with a very, very bright silver from Citadel here, again sponged on top of the miniature to get some really harsh contrast between the silver and the black in the recesses. Moving back to the Carcharadon, you can see that I've got all that Eshin Grey. It was Eshin Grey, by the way, not Administratum Grey. Administratum Grey is what we're using now, mixed in with a bit of Eshin Grey, a sort of 50-50 mix here. And I'm going to stipple this onto all of the areas that I think the light is going to directly hit on this miniature, using an old square-shaped brush. Stippling, depending on the size of the brush you have, gives you much more control and adds quite a lot of visual texture and interest and weathering to your miniatures. I recommend stippling if you're going to do this kind of style. Generally speaking, I use a lot of stippling on nearly every miniature that I do, and you'll see that from most of my videos. Once that's done, we're going to move straight to Administratum Grey and do some more stippling just on the edges and the sort of most harshest of points on this Carcharadon. Back to the Minotaur. Now, a lot of people I've seen who paint Minotaurs make them look a bit too brown, and I don't want to do that. When I did my 40k Minotaurs army, I was very, very happy with the results, and what I did actually was, instead of using a brown wash on my bronze, I made it look more bronze by using a purple wash. In this case, Druchii Violet. I tend to find that an all-over unifying wash of Druchii Violet from Citadel is absolutely perfect for getting the bronze actually looking bronze. Back to our Exorcist now. This guy is going to be a bright bloody red, so no better place to start than Blood Moon Red by Army Painter here, all over the army panels and the entire miniature. I'm going to do this in 2 coats as well, as I feel the first coat in this instance wasn't quite dark enough and I wanted much more of a richer bloody red. It's really important with speed paints and contrast paints to sort of not leave any sort of streaking effect, so just work on each panel at a time, pulling the paint from top to bottom, going with gravity generally, because we don't want any splotchy pooling on this model. We want things to look nice and smooth, especially over these metallics. Okay guys, here it is. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, but let's try it anyway. I'm going to attempt some tiger stripes on this guy. Now, I'm not using any natural references of actual tigers here. I'm actually going off the Rogue Trader image that you can see here. Now, I did have a couple of requests actually, weirdly, in the comments on the last video that I should do tiger claws. Of course, tiger claws are the OG Astral Claws, who are the OG Red Corsairs. So we're going back a bit here, but I do really like this scheme. I know that it's quite a similar sort of era to the Salamanders camouflage scheme as well, which maybe I'll do at some point if people really want me to do that. However, I decided on sticking with the green for Salamanders in this case, as I feel this one wouldn't look too dissimilar to the Salamander if they were next to each other. Now, what I'm going to do to start with is just sort of sketch out some sort of zigzag horizontal lightning bolts, if you were, and these are going to be fairly random. I don't want things to look too uniform because I feel like these stripes need to look quite natural, and what I'm going to do that with is some white scar. In fact, I'm not using white scar, I'm lying to you. It's actually Wraithbone here because it's a little bit thicker. I just prefer the way that it covers compared to other white paints. Now, I want ideally most of these stripes to be about the same thickness depending on which armor panel we're talking about, but all of these tiger stripes are going to be along the sides of the miniature. They're all going to be horizontal. Some of them are going to have slightly more of a diagonal tilt depending on the sort of way that the miniature is standing, but we're going to do the gauntlets, we're going to do the pauldrons, we're going to do the top over the head there, as well as any leg sort of pieces of armor there as well. And this, I have to say, it did take me absolutely flipping ages. So you can probably ignore this scheme when it comes to the less is more approach. However, the rest of the miniature was comparatively easy once we'd done the tiger stripes. So once the white or off-white has been sketched out all over this miniature, you can see in the Rogue Trader image that then inside the white we have a yellow. So I'm going to go with Flash Gits Yellow, I believe it's called, and just fill in the insides of each of these stripes with that yellow, making sure not to go right up to the edges because we want the edges to be white and the insides to be yellow. I found once the actual design, the outline for these tiger stripes was done, doing the yellow was much quicker in this instance as well. And I went around just masking in all of these tiger stripes with that bright vivid yellow. Again, referring to our Rogue Trader image of reference here, you can see that towards the middle or towards the sort of base of each of these tiger stripes, we have a sort of mottled brown kind of effect, or sort of brown going into orange. And I thought Seraphim Sepia as a wash would be perfect for creating a sort of gradient almost into those areas. So I'm using Seraphim Sepia here. I did actually go over it in 2 coats in the end, and I'm dragging from the tip of each of these stripes to the base, making sure that I sort of pull some of the Seraphim Sepia towards that base, creating a sort of natural gradient, if you were. All right, moving back to our Sally. I've never actually painted a salamander because I've never been a huge fan of green as a color generally. But after I did my other Bad Boys of BADAB video, I did do a Mantis Warrior in there and I was pretty happy with the results. However, Mantis Warriors are a slightly more bright, acidic, sort of vivid green than salamanders typically, and I want more of a grimdark salamander here. So we're going to go with moot green mixed 50-50 with that original green that I used as the base coat here. And again, this is going to be done with a sponge, just slightly less heavy than before. As soon as I start applying this mixture, I can see that this is just about exactly the right color that I want from my salamander. It's not too much of a yellowy green. It's slightly colder, especially with the green that we put underneath. Moving back to our Minotaur, I have to say this is probably the simplest scheme out of all of them, and because I've done it several hundred times, this one is really easy for me. Once the Druchii Violet has dry, you can see that things are actually looking pretty bronze at this point. We have an aged bronze going on. I then went in with a very rough dry brush with the Balthazar Gold over the top, just to bring back the luster of some of that metal. This doesn't need to necessarily be done, but I think before we move on to the next step, this is usually a wise thing to do. It also just kind of unifies any areas where the Druchii Violet wash has kind of pulled and created any ugly stains. Once we've done that Balthazar Gold dry brush, we then go in with a fairly light dry brush of Sycorax Bronze. Sycorax Bronze is the natural highlight and the brightest highlight really for this scheme that I'm going for on the Minotaurs here. Again, don't be too crazy with this. You don't want to be too heavy with the Sycorax Bronze. It is a very bright color, but we are going to dull things down with an oil wash later on. So do remember to, or what I do at least, is I tend to paint my schemes quite bright at first generally, with a view to sort of darkening them all down towards the end of my scheme. Back to the Carcharadons Astra Space Sharks here. I know these guys are a favorite. I actually read one of the Space Sharks books recently. I think it was the Red Wake, and honestly, I found it pretty terrible. I know there's people that really like the lore behind the Space Sharks, but I must say, living in New Zealand for 8 years, it is a little bit on the nose at times with the Māori culture, the indigenous culture of New Zealand. I guess it does pay homage to it a little bit, but you know, when you hear an audio book and all of the names are pronounced very badly, it is a little bit uncomfortable to listen to. But the Space Sharks are very cool, and they're even getting their own cosmetic pack in Space Marine 2, would you believe? Anyway, with this one, I went back to Wraithbone and just masked out the helmet, and then I highlighted the helmet with a little bit of white scar just to make things pop. I then looked at the miniature from a distance and realised that the grey just looks a bit too plain, a little bit too blotchy as well. So I thought I'd unify it and add a recess wash all over this with Gryph-Charger Grey, which is a nice grey sort of concrete mid-tone to add over the top of this. It's also a little bit colder still as well. It's got a little bit of blue in it. So this really does unify the miniature before we go on to our next steps. For the helmet here, we're actually going to go with Apothecary White all over that. Apothecary White is just the natural contrast paint for any white that you're doing, and basically that's where we're going to leave it with the helmet. With the Salamander, I just don't think it pops quite enough, so I'm going to go back to Moot Green, which is very bright acidic green. I'm just going to do a sort of edge highlight on some of the raised areas. I'm not going to go crazy, I just want to do a very thin edge highlight along the most sharpest edges on this miniature. I know it's kind of contrary to all of the other videos I do on Less is More, but this is the only edge highlight we're doing, and it's fairly minimal really. There's nothing too hectic going on here. We're not going to go in with other colors and do more. This is really just to make things pop and break up some of that solid shape that we've got with the green. It is quite a jump straight to Moot Green, I have to say, but if you do it in a very thin line with a very small brush and you just sort of take your time to get those raised areas, things will look pretty good. Okay, back to our Tiger Claw. This guy is looking pretty interesting. I mean, it's certainly come out way better than I expected doing freehand. I'm terrible at freehand, especially when I've had too many coffees, which is every day. I think it's pretty good. But moving on to the next bits though, I'm going to do the head. He's the only one with a bare head, so we're going to use Ungor flesh, I believe, in this instance, and just mask out the head here. Once we've done that, we're going to go in with some Wraithbone and just sort of highlight that up as well, just very roughly here. Now the armor bases have been done for all 5 of these Terminators, we're then going to move on to the unifying features. First up, we're going to go with heavy metal, or should I say heavy metal, from Army Painter all over the guns and any other metal areas, chains and things like that, the odd spike here and there, and this is going to be across all 5 miniatures. Next up, we're going to do some black areas. So this is masking out the edge of the pauldrons on the Exorcist here. We're also going to do black on the insides of the Sally's pauldrons, as well as the black on several key areas across these 5 miniatures. I'm going to be using the darkest, which is Abaddon black in this instance. Gorthor brown for any areas of leather on this miniature, any furs and leather. In fact, I'm not going to bother differentiating between these too much. We're just going to do them all in brown. There's not a huge amount of fur or leather, so they're only tiny details. Don't worry about them too much. I think I used Talon sand or something similar for these skulls on each of these guys. All of them have got skulls hanging from their waists and such, and they're a nice way to break up the sort of darker colors with a more bone color here. So we used a sort of mid-tan brown, and then I went in again with some wraith bone over the top of that just to sort of highlight these up a bit. Now for any gold areas, which is only a couple actually, I'm going to do the sort of edges of the pauldron trim on the Carcharadon in gold, because I just feel like this is going to really add to this miniature. If I didn't do this step, I think I might regret it. So just taking my time to go around the edge of the Carcharadons Astra pauldrons once I've blocked them in black and get a nice gold with Emperor Gold from Army Painter. Moving back to the Minotaur wouldn't be a Minotaur without red pauldrons, so we're going to go both of these pauldrons with red. Sometimes it's usually just one, but we're going to mask both of them out with red here, and I believe I'm using Wild Rider red here, or similar, one of the brighter reds from Citadel, just to sort of carefully mask out the shoulder pad, and you want to probably do this in 2 layers just for a bit of smoothness. Going back to the black trim, and any black details you see that are Abaddon black, we're then going to highlight those up just very slightly with some Corvus black, just to add a slight bit of variation and tint to those highest points. Back to the Minotaur's pauldrons, it's looking very bright, so we're going to do a unifying wash of Flesh Tearer's red Citadel contrast all over those pauldrons, and any other areas or tassels or hair that we see across these 5 miniatures. There's been a few sort of tassels on the waist of several of them. I've done them all in the same red color just for more unification. Warm skin shade over the top of the head on the Tiger Claw now, just to sort of get the detail back into the head here. Going back to all the heavy metal areas that we did earlier, we're then going to coat them with a liberal coating of Rattling Grime, one of my favorite contrast paints. I bang on about it a lot. It's just a really nice paint for metal, and I find that it's just really good at making your metals look dark and unassuming, because you don't want the guns to be the main feature of the model. Honestly, what I really don't like is when I see a model that has a really bright gun, but the rest of the miniature is really dark. It looks terrible, which is why I avoid OSL and plasma glow and stuff like that most of the time as well, because it takes away from the miniature's sort of main vibe that I'm going for. I don't want the weapons to be the main feature generally, but maybe that's just me. With only a few more key things that we're going to do after this, our miniatures are looking pretty cool. So we're going to get things ready for some transfers. Now on the Red Corsairs transfer sheet that comes with the battle box, you have lots of interesting little sort of glyphs, almost like hieroglyphs I suppose. Some of them look like pitchforks, some of them look like axes and stuff. And what I don't want to do in this instance is go and put a Salamanders chapter badge on the Salamander, or a Carcharadons one on, because these guys have fallen to Chaos. They are traitors. They're still wearing their old armor, but they are now owned by the nasty Lufthuron. So these guys are forced to wear their chapter's colors, or they like to wear their chapter's colors, or former chapter's colors, but they are working for the Red Corsairs. So I decided to use some of the more interesting glyphs. I don't know what any of them mean, so hopefully they are in the right places, but I decided to use ones that look like they fit that chapter. This one that I'm using here for the Carcharadon almost looks like the sort of teethy head of a shark, perhaps. For the Minotaur, I chose to use this sort of shape which resembles the horns of a bull. Okay, so at this point, all of our 5 Terminators are done. We're now going to go in and do some weathering on these miniatures. I did do a little bit of chipping earlier with a sponge and some dryad bark, as well as some lead belcher as well. Pretty simple to do. Apologies I didn't include that on camera, but there are other videos where I do it so you can see how to do it. But it's very simple. Just hit the edges with a sponge with those two colors. And maybe if you really want to push it any further, you can do it with the original sort of highlight color as well, just to make things pop even more. We're going to do an unifying oil wash, and I want a fairly thick dark wash in this case that is consistent across all 5 miniatures. I'm going to go with a mixture of black and burnt umber. I want to use about half the amount of black to burnt umber as well, and then we're going to use odorless mineral spirits to mix these together into a fairly thick wash. When making an oil wash, it is important to make sure that you get all of the little chunks of oil blended together. So I do tend to spend a lot of time just mixing this together in the pot. It also means that I can check the consistency as well as the sort of overall color here. And what we have is a dark brown. Think like you're making gravy. You want to go through it with the fork loads until you get out those lumps of gravy, because there's nothing worse. Because I tell you, there's nothing worse than lumps in your gravy all over your Yorkshire puddings. When it comes to applying this, obviously you want to put down a paper towel, because in this instance I actually got a bunch of oil on my nice neoprene mat, but you are going to want to do this in a motion that's kind of like just sort of stabbing it on. I don't want to sort of brush the miniature too much. I don't want to cause any sort of abrasions or anything. So I'm just going very carefully around and just dotting a loaded brush of this oil onto my miniatures, making sure that it doesn't flood too much and just moving it around very carefully. Now, there are many different ways of reducing an oil wash. In this instance, I actually deliberately painted all 5 of these miniatures very bright because I wanted to darken them down with this process. So I chose not to use a varnish first. Normally I would use a varnish first because that would mean that it doesn't stain the color underneath too much. In this instance though, I wanted that. I wanted the brown dark stains on these miniatures in the recesses particularly. So I chose not to use a varnish, but saying that, I didn't leave the wash on too long either. I only left it for about 5 minutes, and here I go in with a cotton bud. One end of the cotton bud is just dry to remove the wet parts, and then I go in with some neat mineral spirits and just use it carefully in a sort of rolling motion, very, very softly on the face and any areas that I want to have a little bit more attention to. With the oil wash dry overnight, you can see that our miniatures are looking pretty good at this point. I went in as well after I did the oil wash. Again, apologies for not including it here, but all I did was applied some Martian Iron Earth, I believe it is, Citadel texture paint to the bases. And the next thing we're going to do is actually finish our bases using the same scheme that I did all my BADAB boys in as well, which is using 2 pigment powders combined. The first one is a light rust and the second one is a yellow. With the light rust, I just stipple it onto the bases directly and just jam it in as much as I can, possibly with a fairly aggressive motion, generally speaking, making sure that I don't flick it everywhere. Again, this is a messy thing, so make sure you've got some paper towel done. After that, I then pick 1 or 2 spots on the base at random to add a little bit of yellow to. Now, I don't want to do the entire base in yellow. I just want to create little areas of spot lighting on random parts of the base, and I find that just 1 or 2 of these just really sells the effect of sort of different variation in the ground, but also the lighting as well. Once that's done, it's on to the most fun part, and that is rimming out the base with Abaddon Black. I love this process. It's just, especially when you do pigments actually, because the base looks really messy until you go in with your Abaddon Black and you do 2 thin coats. Shout out to Dunk. On the bases with this, it's just such a sort of zen, sort of meditative process, and it's just, you know that you're at the last hurdle and you've finished your miniatures and you're happy with everything. So there we go, 5 Terminators painted in BADAB schemes. I'm pretty happy with all of them, I have to say. In fact, I would say that I'm actually happier with these than I was with the actual Raiders as well. These 5 schemes are all quite special. The Carcharadons are an absolute winner when it comes to popularity, and I think my Carcharadon in this instance looks pretty damn good. This is most definitely a heretic or just a very naughty Carcharadons Astra working for Lufthuron. I really love the fact that I went for the chain fist on that. He had to have the chain fist because it's so space shark of a weapon. And to be honest, I just think this guy is pretty accurate to Carcharadons, and again, a very, very easy and simple scheme to achieve. I think the base really does sort of contrast with the miniature quite well. Those cold colors and the warm base really do gel quite well. In terms of our salamander, this is the first ever salamander that I've painted, and I'm pretty happy with this one too. There's a number of different ways that I could have done this, I think, but overall I'm happy with the results here. Could I have done perhaps more stippling and building up of color? Could I have done a contrast metallic version of it perhaps? I think I'm pretty happy with where this went. I think I was already thinking about doing a slightly more sort of gradient sort of based one, but I'm going to reserve that for the Raptors when I get round to doing Raptors. I want to do more of an olive drab scheme with the Raptors, and I think more stippling on that would be better, less edge highlighting, but I'm pretty happy with this. And again, the base, the orange base, really pops against that green, and overall it's a pretty nice looking miniature. And now I can tick the box to say that I've painted a salamander, even if this guy is a filthy heretic. Okay, the Tiger Claw. I'm not sure how I feel about this. It sort of waxed and waned as I was going on. To the beginning, I thought this was going to end up looking absolutely horrific. In the middle there, when I did the actual stripes, I was thinking, shit, this is actually looking pretty good. And now by the end, with all the weathering and the oil and stuff, I'm not so sure. I do think that it looks pretty good. I think I did a good effort with the freehand, but I don't know. Let me know what you think. Again, sort of, I guess the base and the stripes are quite similar in sort of color and tone and stuff. Maybe I could have done more with the black armor, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. I just don't think it looks quite as good as the other four perhaps. But again, let me know what you think. I could be totally wrong on this, and this might be the one that everyone loves. I think that's usually the case. The stuff that I don't value is usually what other people value, and the stuff that I do value is usually what people don't. So there you go. But of course, the Tiger Claw had to have the claws. He's the only one with the lightning claws, and overall definitely looks like an absolute apex predator. Onto the Minotaur. Again, I've done hundreds of these guys in exactly the same scheme, and I'm pretty happy with it overall. I probably could have gone a bit further with this one perhaps, but I'm not sure how exactly I would do that. I wanted to create a dirtier, darker sort of Minotaur here, and this guy certainly ticks the box. And again, I think maybe I'm desensitized to Minotaurs because I've seen them so much and I've done them so often that I'm not too excited about this guy. But I'd love to know what you think. Does this read as a heretic Minotaur, or is it just the fact that Minotaurs are already heretics and we all know this, we just don't speak about it? And like any of these videos, when I paint a whole squad in different schemes, there's always one that surprises me, and this is the one that I have to say I was least excited about at the beginning. This is the one that I thought would look the most boring and the least impressive, and actually I have to say the Exorcist is my favorite, and I don't really know why. I just think that the red really looks good, and I'm not even sure why. I think I just managed to get the right balance of weathering and contrast on this miniature to really sell that red armor. It pops and pings off like crazy if you ask me, and is out and out, hands down, my favorite one out of the 5. But again, I would love to know what you think down in the comments down below. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I really enjoy doing these BADAB schemes. I also really enjoy doing an entire squad of different schemes. So you get, from me, 5 different painting tutorials in one video, but they're all sort of unified in vibe. So I really hope this was helpful for you. Of course, I don't expect everyone to go out there and start painting an entire BADAB force of traitors that are all painted in different schemes, but hopefully this gives you some insight into how I go about doing it. And also, if you like any of these particularly, then maybe you could run with one of these schemes in your 40k armies or similar. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please do like, share, subscribe. Check out the Patreon as well to support me further, and I'll be back with another one real soon. Thanks for watching.